evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is September 14th, 2025. I'm your host, Nate Pike, and we got a spicy one tonight. We're going to make some friends, we are. Probably not. Probably not very much at all. But it's interesting because we got a lot of ground to cover tonight. We got a big announcement we're going to be throwing in towards the end as well. Very excited about that. But as we were putting this episode together, there was this little reoccurrent theme, a little vector, little data point that kept popping up, and there's it's nothing more than coincidence, to be clear. But it was just bonkers how many times in the course of putting this episode together, this particular figure repeatedly came up. See if you can spot it as we go through the show tonight. But to start with, we got to talk about the tobacco settlement, because this got a little bit of news. It's got a little bit of attention from folks. And basically what happened is there has been an ongoing class action lawsuit against tobacco companies in Canada for a little while. We'll get back to the premier that initiated it in just a second here. But it's been sort of kind of settled. There's a $713 million upfront payment that was delivered to the province of Alberta. It was invested in July of 2025 as part of a much larger $2.8 billion contribution to the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. So that $2.8 billion contribution that was made to the Heritage Savings Trust Fund included almost $1 billion of this tobacco settlement. Now, this gets complicated. It gets a little uncomfortable, perhaps, because the settlement, the intent of the lawsuit was originally to be able to provide improved care and supports for people who have been harmed by big tobacco. Instead, Danielle SMith decided to put it all in the piggy bank. And this is where it gets interesting, because Alberta estimates, I mean, we got $713 million. Alberta estimates over $6 billion have been spent treating smoking-related conditions between 2020 and 2024. Over the course of 4 years, $6 billion in the province of Alberta because of smoking, because of tobacco. That's a big number. That's a really big number. But there's other critics who have raised the question, hey, if we got this $713 million and it was supposed to go towards the healthcare system, hey, you know how you're saying that it would cost $73 million to cover all of the COVID vaccines for folks? Why couldn't have you just, instead of putting in 713, maybe put in I don't know, 740 or 643 million, and use the rest to cover the COVID vaccines for everybody who wanted to get them, because that is also an unnecessary cost to the healthcare system. Why didn't we do that? But that's not the really fun part of this story, because in doing the background and tracing through how did this lawsuit, it took over 2 decades, by the way, for this lawsuit to finally reach a point of settlement. When you take a look at who was it exactly, who was the premier when that lawsuit was initiated? Well, the premier who chose the legal team for Alberta, none other than Alison Redford. That's just a fun little tidbit that we throw in. It actually turned into a bit of a scandal for her, because there were people who alleged that she had exercised improper authority in picking the legal team, and there was a bit of a conflict of interest that was alleged, was investigated by a third party out of the BC, the conflict of interest folks in BC, because back then, if there was an alleged conflict of interest, you investigated it. You didn't just say, oh, no, it's fine, I'll change the rules. That investigation found that she didn't break any of the rules. But that was a fun little bit of political history for the province of Alberta. Moving on from there is there's a boatload of new polling data that has come out over the last little bit. A lot of it has been done by Angus Reid, and it is definitely worth taking a minute or two to talk about, because there's some fascinating little pieces in here. There's some things that not only, I mean, a lot of people look at polling data and they go, oh, the politicians, that's who should be paying attention to this. And that's not necessarily true, because it also speaks to what are the things that are Albertans in these polls, which are snapshots in time and by no means gospel. But what are the things that Albertans are concerned about? How do they feel about the current political leadership? And it's interesting because there's a little bit of what you'd expect. There's a little bit of maybe some surprises. To start with, let's take a look at the first poll. This came out on September 8th, 2025. And this one focused specifically on how are the premiers doing. And it's not great for most premiers. The highest rated premier in Canada, probably no surprise, is Wabkanu in Manitoba. Danielle SMith is all the way down. She's more than past the halfway mark, and her approval has slipped 5 points. She's sitting at 46% approval. And when the poll did a comparison of how she's been doing over time, she tends to sit between that 42 to 46 range. She's been above it just once in June of 2025. She got all the way up to 51%, but she dropped back down to 46. So that tends to be where Danielle SMith's numbers kind of live. Nothing particularly striking there. But that wasn't the only poll that Angus Reid did. They did another poll. This one came out on September 12th. And this one is a little bit more granular, let's say. So basically what they took a look at is what are the issues that Albertans care the most about, and how do they feel about the leaders of the two major political parties in the province of Alberta. The issues that are at the forefront of mind, there might be some surprises, but there's some other things that really shouldn't be surprises at all. For example, when we take a look at what are the top issues for Albertans, cost of living and inflation, no surprise there. Healthcare, no surprise there. The economy and jobs. It's a big drop off, though. Cost of living inflation at 61%, healthcare at 52%, third place with the economy jobs, 28%, street crime, public safety, 24%, housing affordability, 22%, education, 20%, energy policy is down to 16%. That's a big deal, but it also includes renewables. The deficit government spending, only 13% care about the government spending or the deficit. Relationship with the federal government, only 13% say that is a top issue that they're concerned about. Only 10%. The U.S. tariff issue, Donald Trump. So there's some interesting little pieces here, because it seems like when we take a look at the social media discussion, noise, static, whatever we want to call it, that goes on, all too often, it's dominated by things out of the U.S. But that was the last thing on the list. Donald Trump, the U.S. tariffs, the U.S., last thing on the list for Albertans. The number one concern is cost of living and inflation. And it's fascinating because that's some of the areas where Danielle SMith and the UCP are doing arguably the least. We're going to talk about insurance rates a little bit later on in the show, but there's plenty of examples where Danielle SMith and the UCP have not exercised the levers of power that are at their disposal to make life more affordable for Albertans. But the other piece that's particularly interesting that struck me is the relationship with the federal government, which is everything that the Alberta Next panel is all about. 13%. 13%. Danielle SMith has spent her summer with this taxpayer funded tour of town halls, which have been difficult to watch for many reasons. Only 13% care about it. Only 13% of Albertans rank it as a significant issue. Again, cost of living, inflation, healthcare, the economy, and jobs. And I would make the argument that the economy and jobs kind of folds into cost of living and inflation, but I'm no economist. I'm certainly not an economist on Danielle SMith's panel. How do people see the government's performance on these issues, though, is another place where it gets to be really, really interesting. Poor job for cost of living and inflation, 66%. There's only 27% of Albertans who feel that the government is doing a good job addressing cost of living inflation. Healthcare, 64% feel they're doing a good job. The economy jobs, 64% feel they're doing a poor job on healthcare. 54% feel they're doing a poor job on the economy jobs. 59% feel they're doing a poor job on street crime, public safety. And 63% feel they're doing a poor job on housing and affordability. There are none of the categories in the top 5 that anybody's going like as by a majority. The closest is the economy and jobs with 39%. But in all of the other categories, according to this survey, which is again just a snapshot in time, the overwhelming majority of Albertans feel like the UCP is not doing a good job of addressing these issues. And it gets interesting when you start to compare it to other provinces as well, which the survey did, because they took a look at overall, how do you feel? And then the province is on the right track or the wrong track. And in Alberta, 48% said they feel that it's on the wrong track. 40% said they feel it's on the right track. And 12% are undecided. But what I actually found the most interesting about this particular piece is the fact that of all of the provinces, Alberta is the province where the most people have made up their mind. The not sure, can't say category is only 12% in Alberta. And that speaks to a lot of the concerns that we've heard people express around polarization in the province of Alberta. But we also, in this survey, they also took a look at the leaders. How are the leaders of the two major parties doing? And again, this is worth talking about, because when we take a look, Danielle SMith has a 46% approval. 49% are against her. 5%, I don't know. Naheed Nenshi, only 39% approve. 50% are against him. And 11% are undecided. Now, there's some folks who are going to take a look at that and go, and then she's so unpopular. But there's actually a compelling argument, I think, to be made that it's the undecided piece that is the most interesting, because only 5% of people haven't made up their minds on Danielle SMith. Everybody else, 46 to 49, they know where they stand on Danielle SMith. Naheed Nenshi has almost double the amount of undecideds. There's almost double the opportunity or double the number of people that he has or hasn't convinced about whether or not he's doing a good job. There's questions. And this is something that we have talked about many times on the show, is the comms strategy, I guess we could call it if we're feeling generous, of the NDP. Although, to their credit, I will say they did start posting some videos of their town halls finally. So that was good to see. But their comm strategy throughout the summer has been tepid, if not missing mostly, which is probably reflected in these numbers here with the 11% undecided. The voting intentions, though, is where things are a little bit more stark. Because when we take a look, according to this poll, of decided and leaning voters, 51% of people would vote for the United Conservative Party, 40% would vote for the NDP. The Alberta Party get 4%, Liberal Party get 3%, and other party get 1%. So I guess the Alberta Republicans remain stuck on suck. It's going to be really interesting to see, though, what happens with the Alberta Party's numbers once they flip the switch on their name change. Because there's a lot of questions as to where is the Alberta Party, soon to be the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta in some variation, it sounds like. Where are they going to be picking up voters from? There's no question they probably will. They'll have 2 MLAs, which is 2 MLAs more than they have right now. But are they going to suck support out of the UCP, or are they going to suck support out of the NDP? You don't have to think past the last provincial election where we saw former PC Deputy Premier Thomas Lukasik inviting disenfranchised Progressive Conservative voters to loan their vote to the NDP. So there was a significant contingent of former Progressive Conservatives who were enticed to vote for the NDP in the last provincial election, according to these numbers, maybe they're looking for a little bit more of a home. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the PC party of Alberta, if executed properly, because we've seen plenty of other reboots of political parties. There's been 400 Wild Rose parties or something since the original Wild Rose collapsed or folded into the UCP. And none of them have gotten anywhere near the traction of the former Wild Rose. So it's not just the name of the party that matters. It does matter for sure to some degree, but it's not just the name. It's what you do with it that really, really seems to matter. And that's our fun with polling segment, I guess. Moving on from there. And this one is interesting. There was a letter that was issued that called on the city of Calgary to declare itself a sanctuary city from the policies that the UCP have been putting in place that are targeting, and I feel like that very much is an appropriate word, particularly trans folks, but also the LGBTQ2S plus folks across the spectrum. I want to take a quick sec to read from the letter. We call on City Council to restrict cooperation with the actions taken by Premier Danielle SMith and the Alberta Legislature that discriminate against queer Calgarians' charter rights and freedoms. And it's worth, as we go through this, keeping in mind that one of the pieces that's definitely at play here is there has been an injunction that has been put in place in regards to the healthcare policies, because a judge did determine that there would be irreparable harm if the policies were allowed to go ahead before the whole court process played out, and Danielle SMith probably inevitably plays the notwithstanding clause card. But I digress. These include but are not limited to Bill 26, the Health Statutes Amendment Act, Bill 27, the Education Amendment Act, and Bill 29, Fairness and Safety in Sport Act, as well as the so-called book ban on explicit sexual content announced by Education Minister Demetrios Nicolaides, which unfairly targets queer materials in schools. We urge you to establish rules and policies that would allow queer life to continue as before the recent actions taken by the United Conservative Party. Allow Calgarians to determine the rules of their sporting associations. Give expert librarians the power to determine collection materials. Keep medical decisions between our world-class medical professionals and their patients. Let teachers and students build safe and inclusive learning environments in our schools. Now, it's worth remembering, as a certain Rob is fond of saying, that teachers are very, very much, not teachers, sorry, municipalities are very, very much a product. They're creatures is the word he likes to use. I don't know, creatures just doesn't sound very good. But they're creatures of the municipalities. So the amount of latitude that a municipality could take place is limited. But it's fascinating and tragic that this is where many members of the LGBTQ2S plus community are at, where they're now asking municipalities to take the same approach of sanctuary cities in order to protect what are their charter rights. And again, I know I've said it before. I'm going to keep saying it because it bears repeating. Danielle SMith has said that she will use the notwithstanding clause to make some of these policies come to be. The only reason why the notwithstanding clause exists is to override people's charter rights. So the fact that Danielle SMith has said that she will use the notwithstanding clause means that she is comfortable and willing to override people's charter rights as long as it's the right people. So for members of the LGBTQ2S plus communities to be concerned, to feel threatened, is it's not nothing. And one of the signatories of that was Skipping Stone. And Danielle SMith was asked about them at her press conference on September 2nd.
Skipping Stone considering launching a lawsuit regarding the Bill's 27 pronouns, girls declaring that they're girls before sports. I guess what would the government plan to do in response?
Oh, well, I can tell you, I mean, we have to make sure that we're balancing everyone's rights. And so when it comes to girls and women being able to compete fairly in sport. We want girls and women to be able to compete against other girls and women, and to be able to provide co-ed opportunities for those who are born a different gender. We want to make sure there's opportunities for everyone. But I think that we are watching the global discussion about fairness in sport. There are certain sports that give an advantage to somebody who's born male, and we don't want to disadvantage girls and women. The reason why we have girls and women categories is because we recognize that men are stronger, and men have, in some cases, more stamina. There's biological differences, so we want to make sure everyone has the ability to compete, but we want to make sure women and girls can compete fairly. And we'll see how the court process plays out. I mean, the way our Charter of Rights is written is that we have to make sure that it's reasonable, and that it's evidence-based, and we think they are. We'll be putting forward that argument, and we'll be working as well to make sure that everyone has a chance to compete fairly. But sometimes a co-ed division is going to be the best avenue for people to compete.
Which is a bit of a disingenuous argument from the Premier, as is kind of her brand, because there's some language in there that, again, it's worth digging down, drilling into a little bit, where she says some cases. There might be some cases where some men have more stamina than some women. That's questionable for a lot of different reasons. But the fact that we're using some cases means that it's not a constant. It's not a consistent. There are always exceptions to every single rule that are out there. I've said this before many times on the show. I have encountered many women who could kick my ass at just about everything. I'm okay with that. Does that mean that I wouldn't play sports with them? Absolutely not. But that's the reality, is that depending on the level of training and depending on the genetic components that a person brings to the table, there's a lot of different pieces that determine how sport-ish someone is going to be. But there's another piece of this whole pronoun problem, and that is that the UCP's policy, as she talks about being based on the evidence, the UCP's policy seems to assume that there are only people out there walking around with straight up male period DNA and female period DNA. There's no recognition of the biological realities of folks who are intersex or whose genetics don't make them explicitly male or explicitly female. There can be variation. And there is variation. And the numbers of people who are intersex is, I don't know that it can be exactly measured, but just that alone punches a pretty big hole in the argument, because this policy doesn't make room for those intersex people or how they present. It's an incredibly complex, nuanced discussion. And the fact that the government of Alberta has decided to step into classrooms and try to sort out, because there's just two genders, there's not. It speaks to the oversimplification of a complex and nuanced conversation. There are more sets of chromosomes out there than just XXXY. That's just the reality. And to put forward a policy that's going to prevent people from competing in sports without the acknowledgement of that piece does not seem to be particularly well evidence-based, at least not to me. Moving on from there, we're going to go through the book bans one more time, because this is something that seems to, in many ways, kind of have fizzled oddly, which is weird. Because make no mistake, there are still book bans in place. So in order to sort of cover off where we are now, for the time being, we're going to talk about sort of the history of the book ban. So goes all the way back to May 26, 2025, when Demetrius Nicolaides hosted a press conference where he announced that he was going to be launching consultation that, by the own consultation numbers, they absolutely didn't listen to. But he didn't know that when he did this press conference. But he announced that they were going to be doing some consultation to talk about what sort of role government should have in the appropriateness of materials in schools.
I do want to ask you about, you mentioned earlier that the province does not have any authority per se to be able to book ban, and that's why you don't, have, you don't want to call it a ban. That what you're doing here is that. So we won't use that word. We can use prohibiting, I imagine, or some other word that you would prefer. But I want to sort of understand here, are you going to create any legislation to get that authority then? How are you going to do this? I mean, because what we've been told is that the 2025 to 2026 year is when this will get applied. That only leaves a few months this summer. Will you be able to come up with these policies for the school board to concretely develop and follow by the fall? Could you give us an insight into that? Is there legislative action happening?
No, we don't anticipate any legislative action. I do anticipate we will be in a position to have the new policies and standards in place in advance of the upcoming school year. The current legislative authority and the Education Act does provide the Minister of Education with authority to set policies and standards related to the provision of education. So there is already broadly that authority for the minister to set standards and policies with aspects that deal with education. So, but that's the difference here, right? I don't have any kind of authority to go and pick a particular book off the shelf and say we're not allowing this book in our schools. We can't ban books. The minister doesn't have that authority. There's no legislative authority to do that. The minister, though, does have the authority to develop policies, and so we will be developing a new policy again, as I mentioned, that will simply say something to the effect that books containing graphic depictions of sexual acts, molestation, or self-harm cannot be permitted in elementary schools or in junior high schools. That'll be at a very high level some of the guardrails that we're looking to establish. We don't intend or desire to reduce content on any particular subject, but again, we just want to make sure that that subject is communicated in an age-appropriate way.
So, the big reason why we played that clip is there's one point in particular that it's going to be relevant a little bit later on. Minister Nicolaides was very clear that the minister does not have the ability to ban or not ban, I guess, specific titles. That is not a power that the minister has. That's Demetrius Nicolaides at the end of May. Now, that's fast forward a little bit past the consultation part. If you want all of the nitty gritty details, go back and listen to or watch our live show in Edmonton where we did the deep dive on the book bans. But fast forward all the way to July 4th in the month of Calgary or something. It's all signing things is very, very hard. Demetrius Nicolaides introduced the ministerial directive, the ministerial order that said, okay, folks, this is how it's going to work. And there were some pieces around that order that got people's attention. One of them was the idea that there was an exemption that was carved out for religious texts. So religious texts would not. They were exempt. They could have whatever graphic sexual stuffs in them. They were exempt. And the press secretary to the Minister of Education explained, not just to me directly, it turned out, but the province, why. Our policy ensures young students are not exposed to extremely sexual materials in school libraries. Removing religious text would probably be a charter violation. I mean, they could just use the notwithstanding clause, but that would probably alienate their base just a little bit. But let's go back to what was in that order, because this is where a lot of people said, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Like, a book ban is bad enough, but the way that you've written this order is an absolute train wreck. And a lot of it hinged on this clause right here. Depiction means a written passage, illustration, photographic or digital image, video or audio file. That is the passage from the original ministerial order, where it very, very clearly said, written passage. We're talking about text. Nobody forced them to put that in the book ban. They chose to put that in the book ban. One of the other areas that caused a lot of problems with the original draft was this one. School library means any dedicated library space in a school, including a learning commons, a classroom collection, or any similar collection, but does not include a library governed by the Libraries Act that is located in a school building. So, to be clear, they said even the teachers' collections that they keep in their classrooms for kids to read with, like, I don't know, kids' books, those are considered part of this order. Now, you're probably thinking, well, there shouldn't be any graphic sexual books in kindergarten classes. You're right, and there aren't. Certainly not in teachers' collections. But where it got to be a problem for teachers was this part right here. The school authority is required to implement the following standards for the selection, availability, and access of school library materials. Now, they said you can't have anything, access to anything, but here's where it gets problematic for those kindergarten classroom collections. The school authority must review its collection of school library materials on a continual basis to ensure it complies with these standards and the school authority's policies and or procedures required pursuant to these standards. So all of those classroom collections have to be constantly reviewed by the school authority or the school board. The school authority must establish and maintain a publicly available listing of all school library materials. So all of the books that are in those teachers' collections that aren't part of the main libraries of the school, those now all have to be digitally cataloged and made publicly available. A school authority staff member must supervise the access of school library materials by children or students to ensure that they do not access school library materials that they are not permitted to access. So, two big takeaways here. Takeaway number one, it absolutely included any written books. Takeaway number two, it absolutely created a boatload of work for teachers who have classroom collections. Both of those things were 100% unforced errors. And Danielle SMith was asked about these things. Apparently, though, she didn't read her own order.
I mean, do I need to be any more clear about what graphic images that we are trying to remove from the school libraries? We are not trying to remove classics of literature. What we are trying to remove is graphic images that young children should not be having a look at. Please go and have a look at them yourself and use whatever discretion you feel you need to describe that to your audience without offending them. But that is what we are trying to remove from the school libraries. There has been some willful and purposeful misrepresentation and misunderstanding of the policy. I hate to have to be so graphic, but you know what? Those images shouldn't be shown to kids in elementary schools. So I hope that the school boards will work with us to remove graphic, pornographic images and leave classic books alone.
Now, that was Danielle SMith after the uproar that came when the Edmonton Public School Board had a list leaked. It wasn't released, it was leaked. And I can say that because I know where I got it from. But the list was leaked, and it included a lot of classic literature, because a lot of classic literature does have content that met what was in the ministerial directive. I mean, I've said it a couple of times on the show before, but at the end of the day, if there's a passage in a book that says he touched her breast over her shirt, that is enough to make that book have to be removed from all libraries. That was what the order was. And it's stunning that the Premier and the Minister of Education didn't seem to be able to grasp that their own order that they issued in a written form included the written word. And there was a lot of blowback from that list. And in fact, Danielle SMith got I almost want to call it a privilege, but it's not in a good way. Because when you become the subject of a Canadian literary icon's short story, it's a win and a loss.
I'd be interested in getting your opinion on if you've had a chance to read Margaret Atwood's story and how you were portrayed in it. Would there be a response to that? And did that change at all with this
No, I didn't read it.
Okay. Does it concern you, I guess, then just with that she basically compared you to the blue dress housewife in her original Handmaid's Tale?
Well, I'd encourage her to look at the graphic images I posted.
Now, I mean, Danielle Smith does have a track record of problems truthing. And I find it a little difficult to believe. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I find it a little bit difficult to believe that a literary icon like Margaret Atwood wrote a story about Danielle Smith, and Danielle Smith, who's need to be the center of attention, who's need to sit at the cool kids table, whose ego is not without some reputation. She didn't even look at it. Because here's the thing, and it'll never ever happen, but if I was to find out that Margaret Atwood wrote a short story saying, Nate's just the worst. He is the worst of the worst. His hat and his goatee and all of those things, they're so bad. I mean, if Margaret Atwood wrote it, it would be much more verbose than that. But I would absolutely read it. If Jon Stewart was to say, that Nate Pike at the Breakdown, he's a podcasting hack, and he wrote an article about how bad the Breakdown was, and it was Jon Stewart, I would read it. I would be balled up in the fetal position in tears whilst I did, but I would read it. So the notion that Danielle Smith just didn't read it when she says that she gets so much of her information from social media, let's say it strains credibility at the very least. But it's also really important to keep in mind that she said some things about the book ban reboot on your province, your premier, just last weekend.
One of the things that we have done is made it super clear that we are going after the graphic images depicting pornographic materials. That's what we're going after. So unless any of those classic works are illustrated with graphic images on their sex scenes, they are not going to be included. We are not going after classic books. We in fact think, I mean, I've heard that there's a bit of a run on some of the books that have been named, which is great, because if the kids are going there thinking that they're going to read the dirty bits and they end up picking up some great pieces of philosophy and some great pieces of history and some intelligent thinking, then I think it's all to the good. We are trying to make sure that we protect the innocence of children as long as possible. Images just have a way of staying in your brain, and we just do not want young children to be exposed to that material until they're of an age where it's appropriate and they can understand the context. That normally doesn't happen until after puberty, doesn't normally happen until you're high school. So let's just let kids be kids. That's all we're asking.
Let's just let kids be kids. Now, it's worth remembering that was on September 6th. It wasn't until just on Monday that the updated book bans came out. So when Danielle Smith is saying that they made it super, super clear that they were only talking about the images, again, I find myself having to bring back to depiction means a written passage is literally what they said. But Danielle Smith, she can't say that. She can't get to that place of honesty, I guess, where she acknowledges that the order was very, very poorly written, not unlike the original version of her Sovereignty Act. But that wasn't all that she had to say. She had some words for the Edmonton Public School Board as well.
What about your response to the Edmonton board, to the columnist? It was Brian Lilly, Toronto Sun, I believe, who said the Edmonton board was having a temper tantrum and it was a political stunt. What's your response?
I tend to agree with him, and I think it was inappropriate, and that's why we told all the other school boards, stop releasing what you think is the interpretation of the policy. If you have questions, talk to the minister about it, and we'll also be a lot more clear that we're talking about graphic images when we release the ministerial order on Monday. So I think that, you know what I would have liked the school boards to have said when we released that policy? I would have liked them to have said, Of course, we don't want graphic pornographic images shown to children. We'd be very surprised if there were any books of that nature. But we'll go and take a look and make sure that they're off the shelves. That's all I needed them to say. But the fact of the matter is, Edmonton Public and Calgary Public were the ones where parents complained about books with graphic pornographic images being available in school libraries to young kids. So maybe there was a little bit of defensiveness because they were the ones who got our attention and they were trying to deflect. But just comply with what parents want. Parents do not want graphic images being shown to their kids. Parents have the ability to choose in their home environment whatever books they would like their kids to have, but they rely on us when they send their kids to public school to make sure they're not going to be exposed to inappropriate material. It's our job, and I just would ask the school trustees to do their job.
In fact, parents were very clear in that consultation that Nicolaides did that it is not the job of government to determine what materials are appropriate or inappropriate. They're very, very clear about who they wanted doing those things. And one of the reasons for that might be all of the books that Danielle SMith and the UCP have held up as having these offensive graphic images are award-winning graphic novels, in the same sense that if you take a look at books like The Handmaid's Tale or Stephen King's It or Brave New World or 1984, there will be small sections of that book that in isolation, without the rest of the content and the context, could be viewed as offensive. But taken within the rest of the content and the context, it's a very important part of the narrative device. But that seems to be a bridge too far for the UCP and Danielle SMith to be able to wrap their heads around. And again, for Danielle SMith to say, why didn't if they just gone with the intent, if they just knew what we meant and ignored the part of the law that we wrote that said written word, if they just listened to what we meant and ignored the rest of the rules, everything would have been fine. That is a terrifying sentiment to be expressed by the leading individual in charge of legislation in the province of Alberta. That's just bonkers. For somebody whose job is literally to write laws to say, oh man, if people just didn't listen to like the words that we used and instead just listen to the intent, that'd be great. I mean, I suppose there's probably an argument to be made that if people listened to the intent of the books that Danielle SMith and the UCP have tried to target and denigrate, as opposed to focusing on the specific words and passages and images that they don't like, that'd be great too. But that was the Saturday. Then we get to the Monday, and we got the new order. And I love the fact that the order that was issued, they didn't even let the minister, they didn't have him sign it. It's typed. When you're so good at your job of signing the thing that they have to just type it for you. And there were some important changes that were made. They changed the criteria for what's a bad book to visual depiction. So visual depiction means a visual or graphic representation, such as a drawing or a painting, an illustration, a photographic or digital image or video file. So now visual depiction, the written piece, is gone. They took it out. They took out the passage that caused them all the problems, because it was the passage that caused a lot of the problems. They also made some clear definitions in regards to classroom collection. A classroom collection means a teacher's collection of literary materials, including books, magazines, comics, graphic novels, or other literary or graphic materials, whether in physical or electronic form, that are selected, curated, and managed by the teacher for use or available to children or students in the teacher's classroom. And then they also changed the library requirements. Still not great, though. Effective January 5th, 2026, the school authority is required to implement the following standards respecting the selection, availability, and access of school library materials. Same things as before. They got to make sure there's nothing inappropriate available. They must school authority must regularly review school library materials to ensure the school authority complies with these standards and school authority's policies and procedures required in accordance with these standards. The school authority must establish and maintain a publicly available listing of all school literary materials other than those contained in a classroom collection. The school authority must ensure that the parents of the children or students who have access to a classroom collection are informed of the school library materials contained specifically in the classroom collection. And there's a little bit of latitude that's afforded there. So it sounds reasonable, right? Look at all the concessions that they made. Now, the classroom collections, they only have to be made available to the parents. So you can say, hey, parents, if you'd like to see the books in the classroom collection, come on by. You can take a look yourself. That does technically meet the criteria of the minister's order, which is good because it means that kids get to read their favorite kindergarten through like grade 2, 3 books without having to have the teacher pull them or restrict them because this government can't write legislation out of a wet paper bag. But there is a couple of other pieces that are really important to highlight. Remember how we said very at the beginning that the minister couldn't approve or disapprove specific books? Looks like they forgot that part. By October 31st, 2025, school authority must provide with the minister the list of any school literary materials that the school authority intends to remove from schools in order to implement Section 2A of these standards. So now the minister is the arbiter. The government is the arbiter of what books should or shouldn't be included on lists. It's almost as if they got embarrassed because they wrote a bad ministerial order and schools complied with it. And so now, before any lists go public, before the end of January happens, they have to see everything that's going to be removed. So they make sure that only the right books are getting removed. But again, let's be very, 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 very clear. This is still a book ban. Just because it's less of a sweeping book ban than it was in its original incarnation does not mean it is not still a book ban. It 100% still is a book ban. And the government, the education ministry, has taken a further step in centralizing their own power and authority over what books get banned with this new slightly less it's probably a lot less restrictive book ban, but there's still very much a book ban in place. And where it gets even more bonkers is Danielle SMith went on a talk show, if you will, hosted by somebody who does not like us very much. And we still a clip from that.
You can't be happy with the international attention around that move to remove a bunch of graphic material out of Alberta's school libraries. Are you surprised at how this has blown up?
Well, I think that there was some precision. We maybe should have put into the initial ministerial order. We thought by demonstrating the kind of materials that we wanted removed from the classroom that we would have the school board say, yes, you're right. We don't want elementary school kids to see those either. So we were a little bit surprised when Edmonton Public decided to take their classroom list, run it through AI, and then every dirty passage and every dirty book they determined had to be taken off the shelf. That was certainly their decision, not our decision. So we had to make it super clear what it is that we were aiming to do. I think that as kids become mature and adult and understand human sexuality, of course they can be exposed to more challenging materials. But what we were really concerned about is that there were graphic images that there's no other way to describe it, that were pornographic, that were available in K-12 libraries, and so they were available to young children. And we want those off the shelves. So I think we've made it super clear what it is that we're after. Don't show graphic images to children, and leave the classics alone. And so I think the spirit of what we intended is finally being implemented. It took a little while for us to get there, but I'm pleased that the other school boards seem to understand what we're trying to do.
So you see, it was Edmonton School Board's fault. They ran it through the AI, the artificial intelligence. They They asked the computers what books should be determined. There was no human judgment that was exercised. And if only they just looked at the materials that we'd shown and they just understood that that's what we meant instead of, again, the actual written word that they put out there. Even at a point where Danielle SMith has had to massively change the book bans, which, again, to be clear, are still book bans, even at the point where that ministerial directive had to be almost completely rewritten, Danielle SMith still can't say, yeah, swing and a miss. We kind of crapped the bed on that one, didn't we? Yeah, again, yeah. We're going to try to do better. That's not what she did, which is wild given her well-established personal philosophy on the record about what you're supposed to do when you make a mistake.
When I'm wrong or make a mistake, I will look to follow the example of our dear departed friend, Premier Ralph Klein. Admit to it, learn from it, and get back to work. Because that is the Alberta way.
It's the Alberta way. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the teacher situation because there's a lot that's happened in the last couple of weeks, and there's some things that are worth highlighting. There's some things that are worth emphasizing. So, to go back to the beginning of things, there's every few years you got to have a contract with these public sector workers, and you'd better believe there's a disclosure coming pretty quick here. But every once in a while, you got to have these contract negotiations with these public workers. Usually, the contracts they're only good for about 4 years or so, almost as if that's how long the government typically lasts. But the government and the teachers, they have not been able to come to any kind of an agreement. And so back in June, teachers had a vote. It was June 6th to June 8th, and they voted whether or not they should consider pursuing strike action because the province was not budging. 94.5% of the people who voted for strike action. And there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of nuance in this whole thing. We've done several episodes on this, and it's worth keeping that in mind. We're not going to go through and do a whole 45 minutes on the teachers' strike right now, because this episode would be over sometime next week. And then we've got to put together a whole new episode, and it turns into a whole thing. But there are a couple of things that are worth highlighting. So the first thing is the teachers, they voted that they could have their strike. The question as to when that strike was going to happen has been looming for quite some time. Now, let's go back to that Your Province, Your Premier from last weekend, because Danielle SMith had some thoughts.
Contract talks with Alberta teachers. They have stalled. The ATA has a legal strike mandate that runs till early October. Does the recent agreement this week with public sector workers give you a sense of optimism about reaching a deal with the teachers?
Well, I think people are seeing that we've put a fair deal on the table. I mean, we came to a deal with the nurse practitioners, we came to a deal with the doctors, we came to a deal with the nurses, we've come to a deal with the public service. We've got there's another union, HSAA, that's going to put the same deal to their members on September the 10th, and it's 3% per year over 4 years. It's 12% pay increase. I'm just ask taxpayers, are they seeing the same kind of pay increases? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that we're giving fair increases, but also ones that we can afford and that are consistent with what we're seeing in the broader market.
And it's not just the pay increases, though. My understanding is that for teachers, many of them, it's class sizes, the working conditions.
Yeah, and so they asked for us to put more resources, dedicated resources on the table to hire more teachers. We committed to 1,000 new teachers per year for the next 3 years, and they broke off talks. So we think that we are hearing from teachers. We know we're hearing from them the issues of complexity in the classroom and classroom sizes and issues. Why we have an $8.6 billion new construction program so that we can build more classroom spaces is why we've committed to not only give a fair increase but also pledge to hire more teachers. And it's the ATA leadership that walked away. So we'd like to ask them to come back to the table because I think we're on the right track of addressing the things that teachers care about, and we need a bargaining partner to do that.
Now, there's a lot to unpack there. and we're going to try to unpack a little bit of it. One of the first things that you have to keep in mind is that teachers have not gotten any significant increase for literally like a decade, probably a little bit longer. Because back when the NDP came to power, one of the things that they had to address was the downturn that had happened in oil and gas. And they went to the teachers and they were like, hey, not just the teachers, but they went to the teachers like, hey, so we're budgetarily screwed here. We can't really, can we work something out? And teachers took some years with almost no increase, and some years with no increase, if I'm remembering correctly. So to say, hey, Albertans who get your raises somewhat frequently, how do you feel about the teachers getting a raise? Is a little bit apples to Rubik's Cube. It's not really a fair comparison. But one of the other things that's really important to keep in mind is the amount of unpaid work that teachers do. Most people, when they go to work, they go and do their job, and then they go home. And that is the end of their workday. That is not the case for teachers. And I got to put on my old person glasses for this next bit because I want to make sure that I get it right. But we spoke to some folks and we asked for a list of what are the things that teachers don't get paid for. Extracurricular activities. You know, those football things that and all of those sports that Danielle SMith is so committed to influencing that she'll make new laws. Teachers don't get paid for those. Graduation, commencement, rehearsals, and ceremonies. Teachers don't get paid for those. IPP, or kids who have special needs or learning disabilities. Teachers don't get paid for the development of those. Teachers don't get paid for lesson planning. Teachers don't get paid for assessment of child's learning or marking. So every time a teacher gets an assignment that they're going to mark, they don't get paid to do the the marking of those things. They don't get paid for report writing. They don't get paid to liaise or coordinate those IPP or ISP activities. They don't get paid for transition planning for the following school year. If they are requested to have a meeting with the teacher, or meeting with parents, if that meeting is requested by administration, they're paid. But if the teacher requests to have a meeting with the parents, they're doing that out of their own time because they care about the kid and the quality of that kid's education. Same thing with IPPs and ISPs. They're not paid for the time they spend putting together newsletters, emails, phone calls with parents, teacher cohort debrief meetings. They're not paid for. Collaborative planning meetings. They're not paid for. If they are requested to have a meeting with admin by admin, they do get paid for those. But if the teacher wants to speak to admin themselves, that's not paid for. If they want to apply for a grant, that is not time that they're paid for. If they set up an event or take down an event, like a science fair or anything like that, that's not paid for. Sourcing, stocking supplies required for instruction, that's not paid for. Instructional equipment maintenance, so like gym equipment, labs, home ec, shop, that kind of stuff, that's not paid for. There's a long list of things, including detention. The teachers aren't paid for. It's not part of their assignable hours. It's not part of the pool that they get paid for. And this is the frustrating part of the conversation. And this is the thing that gets me particularly vexed, is that you have people who say, oh, teachers are just like everybody else and they get those 2 months off every summer. No, they don't. Their salary for the year is spread out. That's all that happens there. And if teachers ever decided that they were not going to do all of those things that I just listed off unless they were getting paid for them, the education system would shut down overnight. So it's not a fair comparison to say the teachers are getting all of this wonderful stuff. They're doing all of these things and they get paid just like everybody else. It's not accurate. And one of the things that the UCP has repeated is this idea that they promised that they would put in 1,000 new teachers every year for 3 years to address classroom complexity. But even then, the question came up on your province of your premier, how are you going to accomplish that?
Where do you plan to find the extra 1,000 teachers?
We've got some exciting new proposals about how we're going to potentially create more pathways for people to be able to get an education degree. I'll leave it to my education minister to roll that out. We're going through the process of consulting on it, running it through cabinet, running it through caucus, but we're looking at a number of different avenues. And part of the reason we had to do that is increasingly we're seeing that people want a trades education, and it is far better to find a way to get a welder or an electrician or a plumber a teaching certificate so they can learn how to apply that to teaching kids than to try to get a teacher trained up in welding and electrician and plumbing. So we want to get more tradespeople into our schools so that they can make sure that the kids get exposed to that earlier. So we're going to have some exciting new changes to announce there.
Okay, let's go through it. So the education minister is going to be rolling out some exciting new changes as to how people can get teaching certificates. The education minister, the same guy who didn't know how to sign his own ministerial order, who wrote an order so bad that it had to be completely retconned. That guy is going to redefine how teachers get credentialed in the province of Alberta. Cool. What could possibly go wrong? Look, anybody who has a kid who's been in school knows that there are days where the schools bring in subject matter experts. You're not going to get a teacher. When my kids were younger, they did a whole unit on learning how to hoop dance. And it was a whole unit in elementary school. Guess what didn't happen? The teachers didn't teach the kids how to hoop dance, not only because that could get complicated very, very quickly, but not all teachers know how to hoop dance. And I would argue that should be taught by subject matter experts, which is exactly what they did. They brought in somebody who had the background, the skills, and everything to teach kids how to hoop dance. Having somebody come in to teach skills or to demonstrate skills under the supervision of a teacher already exists. And if people who work in trades want to get a teacher's certificate, that pathway already exists. So it's a little bit disingenuous, because one of the things that you have to realize is there's a tremendous amount of education that goes into somebody who wants to become a teacher. And I mean no disrespect to any welder. And I will include myself. I have a grand total for the work that I do, and we're getting to that disclaimer even quicker. I have a grand total of 4 years of post-secondary education. Now, I'm very, very marginally competent in what I do, but I also have no illusions, and I don't have a problem saying teachers have an entirely different job that I do, and they have more education that's required for that job. I don't have a problem with that. It doesn't diminish me to acknowledge that there are people out there who have PhDs. I don't have a PhD. I don't want a PhD. I don't need a PhD for what I do. But to suggest that just because I've spent 4 years of post-secondary education getting good or competent at what it is that I do means that I all of a sudden have the skills to teach those skills in a classroom is not true, especially when we're talking about public school classrooms, because the complexity, the depth and breadth of complexity that exists from kindergarten to grade 12 is enormous. So it's a little bit bullshitty there. Anyways, that was on September 6th. On September the 10th, teachers announced that if the deal isn't reached between the ATA and the Teachers Employer Bargaining Association, which is in effect the government because they get their mandate from the government, reach a negotiated settlement for teachers, students, and their families, teachers will be on strike October 6th. So teachers announced that a strike is coming. There you go. Danielle SMith was asked about her thoughts on that other talk show. Here's what she had to say.
thousands of Alberta families are probably bracing for what everybody expects to be a teacher's strike. They've served strike notice, takes effect October 6th. I know that there's an offer on the table. You've commented on it, 12% over 4 years, 3% in the first year. Is there a world where you think this situation can be resolved? Are you optimistic that you can keep Alberta teachers off the picket line like 3 weeks into the school year?
Well, I think it's very much up to the leadership of the ATA. I think that the leadership may have overpromised to their membership, and as our very fair offer was revealed, I don't know that they have really spoken with their membership about what it means. I mean, we have had over 50% of our collective bargaining that have settled at the rates that we've been offering, 3% per year for the next 4 years. That's 12%. And I'm just asking everybody to look at their own paychecks and see if their employers are giving them 12% over 4 years, because we think it's very fair. It's very much in keeping with what we're seeing across the country. And here's the question. I mean, if we try to have a wage settlement much beyond that, then it cuts into budgets for other things. We have $1 billion that we want to spend on getting more education assistance in the classroom. We pledged $750 million more to get more teachers in the classroom, 1,000 teachers per year for the next 3 years. So if we end up cutting the number of teachers and the number of EAs, then we're not going to deal with the foundational issues that we're hearing that teachers want us to address, which is classroom conditions. They want smaller classes and they want more hands in the classroom to be able to help them deal with complex needs. So we feel like we've got a solution on the table, and we're very hopeful that the ATA leadership is going to help convey that and also help us in being able to bring the teachers to understand that this is a balance. We're also out of money. I mean, we need to balance our budget. We need $74 a barrel of oil to balance our budget. And that's why we've had a few good years, is that it's averaged at or above that. But it's now averaging 60. And we're hearing that Donald Trump wants to drive it even lower into the 50s. So under the current circumstances, we've got a $6.5 billion deficit. There just isn't money to pay for higher and higher wages that are outside, quite frankly, what we're seeing in the private sector or other jurisdictions. But yes, we have to hire more teachers. We have to hire more EAs. So I'm hoping some progress is made at the bargaining table on that.
Now, there's a couple pieces that I want to highlight there, and then the one at the very end that just makes me giggle. The first piece is there are jurisdictions where teachers are getting paid more. I think it was Manitoba is one where the teaching salaries are above what Alberta is currently offering on their latest deal. So there's that. There's also a question to be had. It's fascinating how Danielle SMith, the free market libertarian capitalist, doesn't seem to understand supply and demand. Because when you have 94.5% of the voting teachers saying, yeah, not good enough, that means that you haven't met the market value. It's very, very basic. If you want to buy somebody's time from them, you have to make sure that you're paying them appropriately for that time. Otherwise, they won't sell it to you. It's a supply and demand. I think maybe. I don't know. I'm not an economist, but you get the idea. The basic principle is if you're not paying people well enough for their time, they're going to stop selling you their time. And that strike vote seems to very, very strongly show people do not believe that they are getting paid fairly for their time. So there's that big piece. To suggest that it's the ATA's responsibility to educate their membership, who are teachers. Wow, there's a special type of confidence that you have to be able to make a statement like that. But the thing that makes me giggle the most about that clip was the little ad that was running in the bottom there. Because as anybody who's been following the show for any length of time knows, we like to keep track of who's on the government dole. It started with the Western Standard, because the Western Standard said, any news media organization that takes government money in any way, shape, or form, they can't be trusted. They've sold their soul. And then we figured out that the Western Standard was taking advertising money from the government of Alberta. And then we figured out that the Countersignal was also taking money from the government of Alberta. And it turns out that our good friends at Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson who are advertising banner ads on the bottom of their program while they're interviewing the Premier of Alberta. And there was no disclaimer of that in their program, are also apparently taking government advertising because Play Alberta is a government of Alberta crown corporation. It's owned by AGLC, I think it is, but it's government. So to run a government ad whilst interviewing the Premier of Alberta, I laughed for a little while. Moving on from there. And this is the disclaimer part. So bear with me, folks, because wow, do I have bias in this that I need to disclose. And I also need to disclose and be very, very clear, just in case any of my bosses are watching this. I do not claim to speak for any organization other than myself, or in broad terms, the breakdown, regardless of any employer affiliations or anything like that. These are purely the opinions of myself and the breakdowns editorial folks. So let's keep that in mind for the next 10 minutes or so, shall we? Because one of the things Danielle SMith mentioned in one of those clips was we have a contract negotiation that's going on with HSAA, and we've given them the same deal. We feel good about it. They should not have felt good about it. So the reason why I say all of those disclaimers is because I work for Alberta Health Services Emergency Health Services as a paramedic. So I have to disclose that I am directly in the middle of this particular contract negotiation, which is why I say, again, for the cheap seats, not speaking for anybody but myself, thank you. So please, neither HSAA or AHS, EHS, send me emails. But I do. I have a huge bias in this, and I don't mind disclosing. I don't have any obligation to, but I don't mind disclosing that I voted no for the agreement that was offered. Now, it was titled a tentative agreement, and there's some nuance even to be found in here because the agreement, it was a little bit divisive. It offered certain categories of practitioner bigger increases. It offered some less increases. It's kind of a mess. And a lot of people felt that there were a lot of professions that it didn't treat fairly. I don't mind saying that the biggest reason why I voted no is, for me, is about respect. Simply because the way that this government has denigrated healthcare under Danielle SMith since she became premier, and the fact that so much of her leadership race was about denigrating healthcare workers, denigrating the healthcare system, which is, to be clear, by extension, denigrating healthcare workers, because that's who the healthcare system is made up of. To come to the table with a very weak sauce offer was disrespectful. And it was on brand, given the amount of disrespect that I personally felt has been shown to healthcare workers in the province of Alberta. So do with that what you will. Yeah, I'm super biased on this. But HSAA, they had their vote. 78% of members voted, and which is apparently one of the largest voter turnouts that HSAA has ever had. I'll be, again, personal experience only. I believe I've been with HSAA for 3 contracts now. Most of the time, it's a fairly small turnout, and it's like overwhelmingly accepting the contract. Because historically, there's been a little bit more to it. And quite frankly, there wasn't a belief that maybe we should stand up for ourselves a little bit better. 59.37% of voters rejected the government's latest contract proposal. So it's not as big of a majority as teachers got, but given the context of the history of HSAA, it's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal. I don't mind saying that. And, you know, I've talked on the show before, and we had a conversation with another paramedic a little while back where we're talking about the wages that sort of the mid-level ambulance workers, primary care paramedics get. And it's not great. It's not. there's a lot of people who have to work a lot of overtime in order to make ends meet. And these are the same people that are responding when people are having the worst days of their lives ever. These are the same people who are responding when they are somebody's family member is in cardiac arrest, or somebody's child has been injured or hurt. And this is, again, one of the reasons why, for me, it is so fundamentally about respect. Because if you're coming with a boilerplate offer for that, it's just not, it's not good enough. Those are my feelings, not the feelings of anybody else, or God knows, my employer. But HSAA, they had themselves a press conference, and the president of HSAA, Mike Parker, who's been on the show a couple times, he's very spicy. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get him on again, and we'll do all of the same disclaimers again. He had some thoughts.
Today, HSA members are sending a clear message. They are rejecting a deal that does not support them enough. This decision of our members reflects the truth of what Albertans are experiencing in healthcare right now. Our health workforce is under immense strain. We face a dangerous shortage of healthcare professionals in our province. A shortage that is felt by every Albertan who endures longer response times, longer wait times in emergency rooms, delayed surgeries, therapies, and the prolonged agony of waiting, often for months. Our members are living these challenges with Albertans each and every day. They care so deeply for their patients, but that care now comes with an unmanageable cost to all of our members: short staffing and no work-life balance. Burnout's becoming routine, pushing more people out of these professions.
And I should be very clear as we go through the next two clips. HSA isn't just paramedics; it's a whole boatload of healthcare workers. So you're talking about respiratory therapists, and another example that I find particularly telling is it also includes addictions counselors. So despite this government's commitment to addressing mental health and addictions, this is the contract where they could be paying people to attract the best possible people to do that kind of work. But Mike Parker also brought some pretty significant numbers too.
The numbers tell the story. 89% of our members say the system is in crisis. 80% say that short staffing is harming their own health and well-being. 67% of our members report inadequate staffing levels. 63% of our members are already burnt out. And a full 1/3 say that they are thinking of leaving Alberta, or worse, leaving healthcare entirely. Our members are healthcare in this province, and Alberta simply cannot afford to lose them. Without us, this system doesn't work. And the more professionals we lose, the bigger the gaps in our care, and the more Albertans who fall through the cracks. Our members are asking for wages that respect the work that our members do every single day. And that allows us to attract more colleagues to the front lines so that we can continue to provide the care that all Albertans deserve.
And I don't disagree. Again, speaking only for myself, I don't disagree with anything that that Mr. Parker said there. Nothing he said does not align with my personal experiences. And the thing that I think is most striking, and again, goes back to that idea of respect. It goes back to how this government has treated healthcare workers, is the reality that 1/3 of the membership of HSAA has said that they're looking at leaving healthcare or the province entirely. So it's not just that this is about the healthcare piece. It's also about the way that this government has chosen to relate to healthcare workers in the province. And that's heartbreaking because, to be very, very clear, I absolutely love my job. I absolutely love doing what I do professionally. I mean, I love this too, but I love the other thing as well. And it is one of the greatest privileges of my life to be able to go to work as a paramedic and provide emergency medical services for people who need them. That the joy of doing that has never been diminished for me. But it is difficult to find that joy when you have a government that's consistently telling you that A, you're not worth it, or you're part of the grand conspiracy, or God knows what else. Now, Nate Horner did respond. He did have a response on September 10th. Again, it was kind of what you would expect. I'm disappointed that Alberta Health Services and the Health Sciences Association of Alberta have not ratified a new collective agreement. Union members decided to vote against the ratification of the deal. The ratification in this case involved a tentative agreement reached between the parties at a table after many months of bargaining. I note that unlike other failed ratification involving a mediator third party's recommendations, the tentative agreement was based on terms and conditions proposed by HSAA and recommended by the union to their members. It is now up to the union to determine why the ratification vote failed regarding its own proposed deal. Alberta's government remains ready to return to the bargaining table when the union and its bargaining team gain a better understanding of their members' interests and priorities. Out of respect for the bargaining process, I have no further comment at this time. And I'm going to let Mr. Parker respond to that one.
Today, Minister Horner had said it is now up to the union to determine why the ratification vote failed regarding their own proposed deal. I'm wondering what you make of that statement.
Yeah, that's interesting. The minister is very aware of the shortcomings of this wage offer. To be clear, we spoke to them directly. They know what's going on here. We hope the government of Alberta and Alberta Health Services realizes that our work over the last 16 months to explain to them the shortcomings will now reflect the work that they bring back to us to conclude a deal.
So to be clear, if one was to read between the lines maybe just a little bit, to be clear, 16 months of negotiations went on. And ultimately, this was the deal that HSAA believed they could get. But one of the little quirks of the bargaining process is there are very real limitations in regards to what they can discuss publicly or with their membership while that bargaining process is going on. So the only way to let the membership know that this is what the government had said that they were going to stick with was to have this ratification vote. It was, in my opinion, if I'm right, speaking only for myself, a clever little move to put it to a ratification vote so everybody could see what it was that the government was offering. And it's fascinating that once that process started, that's when the government started to say, hey, we're giving everybody the same 3% over 4 years. That's just what we're offering everybody. It's fascinating that was their position. A couple more segments left. Before we do, though, I'm not going to get into the topic tonight. I'm not going to get into the topic at all. And it'll become pretty clear what topic we're talking about. But there is some hypocrisy that I think needs to be addressed. And I'm going to play this clip about the topic, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Does an incident like this change, perhaps, or maybe even just advance maybe some of the initiatives you've been considering, some of the policies you might implement, maybe even things that may hinge on funding for post-secondary institutions?
Well, look at what we just went through. I mean, there was a Christian rock singer, Sean Feucht. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Everybody, it's Feucht. But we were under a lot of pressure by people who didn't want him to be able to have his concert on the legislature grounds. So I hope that what happens is those people who wanted us to cancel his permit are doing a little self-reflection. It turned out to be a very peaceful event. I think there were 5,000 people who were there. There were a handful of protesters, which was fine. Everything stayed under control. And you can make your views known without it getting violent and without people being at risk. And that's, I think, what we try to do as a government is we try to live the values that we think should be permeating through our various institutions. I think our universities have done a good job. I know that other universities, when there was particularly fraught protests happening at universities across North America around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They were shutting universities down and making students feel unsafe. But our two universities decided no trespassing. So they wanted to make sure the campus was safe for students and no overnight camping. And so, as I understand it, the protesters came back day after day, were able to make their views known, but the students on campus were able to feel safe. So there is a way to be able to do both. And I'm just encouraged that what I'm seeing in the institutions that they really are trying to make those spaces safer for people of all views. And that's how it should be. That being said, I mean, there is a limit on speech, as we know, but they're criminal code limits. If you're going to incite hatred against somebody and put them, an identifiable group, at risk, that we have criminal code laws so that it doesn't go too far. But most of what I see in the public square falls well short of that. And so I think that we have to kind of recalibrate that just because your feelings are hurt by what somebody says, or just because you disagree with them, it doesn't mean that you cancel them or ban them or try to get them fired from their job. We have to have a much greater tolerance for discussion, because free speech is the foundation of democratic countries. Being able to share controversial views, being able to share different views, is absolutely foundational to how democracy works.
So just to be clear, because I want to make sure that I really understand this. If you have a person out there who's saying something that you don't like, you shouldn't try to get them fired. Go on. The hypocrisy is bonkers. It's just bonkers. To say nothing of the fact that there's a lot of inherent contradictions in what Danielle SMith said there. She starts by saying, it was a peaceful event with the Sean fucked. It's pronounced Foyt. It is pronounced Foyt. The Sean Foyt event. It was a peaceful event. Well, I'm not sure about that. I think there's maybe some questions to be asked about that, because a lot of it depends on how you define peaceful. And as Danielle SMith went into her next section on universities, she's talked about how important it is that people are able to feel safe at their universities. They shouldn't have to feel afraid by the protests or the speech of other individuals. Let's be clear. Sean Foyt is a hate preacher, period, end of sentence. He has targeted LGBTQ2S+ individuals and said straight up hateful things about them. He has made them to be less than human to his audience and to people who hear him. He has done the same thing for women who dare to think about accessing reproductive health care. The reason why people were out and protesting this numpty is because he tries to invalidate their existence. He tries to invalidate their rights to health care. And he does it all while wrapping himself up in his own religion. There are a lot of people who have very, very good reasons to not feel safe when the rhetoric that Sean Foyt is being thrown around. So the hypocrisy of people should be able to feel safe, but as long as there's no physical violence, then it's okay. But we have to be very careful with our language, because if we use inflammatory language or if we use hate speech, then that can lead to other things. And gosh, we sure don't want that. And it ignores the greater point. And the greater point is simply this. If you are not an elected official, if you are not somebody who is in a position of leadership, the standards are not the same. If you have said, I want to lead a thing, I want to be the leader of the United Conservative Party, I want to be the leader of the province of Alberta, if you've taken that mantle and pursued it and achieved it, you have put yourself in a position of leadership. And leadership is not about choosing the safest ground possible. It's about saying, these are the standards. And sometimes that means pissing off the people that maybe you have the responsibility of leading. But part of the responsibility of leadership is not taking the path of least resistance. It's also about taking the path of explaining to people why it is you're doing these things and why it is important. And for Danielle SMith to say that Sean Foyt's event and having a hate monger on the legislature grounds was peaceful. If the argument that we're having right now, if the conversation that we're having right now is that words can incite things, that means words can incite things. Not acknowledging that when it's convenient, or choosing to not acknowledge that when it's inconvenient, is not leadership. It's cowardice. Period. End of sentence. And with that, we're going to do a little bit. There's a couple other clips from Your Province, Your Premier. We fixed your graphic, by the way, QR77. There's a couple other clips that are relevant, especially given the polling information that we talked about earlier tonight. And I want to just go through those really quickly, because again, it speaks to the leadership vacuum. One of the questions that Danielle SMith was asked was in regards to the trade war that was going on with China, in regards to the canola tariffs. And her response is difficult to interpret.
Well, I would say on the issue of tariffs and canola in particular, as we know, we were getting punished in Western Canada on canola, on pork, on Pulse products because of the 100% EV tax that is on Chinese electric vehicles. What is the connection? Well, I guess the Chinese know that it's going to be a way to divide our country, to pummel us in the West on products that are needed in order to protect an industry that doesn't quite exist yet in Ontario, and that's been the big frustration that myself and Scott Moe and Wab Canoe have had. So I think the real solution is to get rid of the 100% EV tax and then normalize some relations with China on the issues that on trade.
See, the Chinese, what they want to do is they want to put a tariff on canola, because that way maybe we'll get rid of the tariff on electric vehicles that we have in place to try to protect the developing electric vehicle industry in Ontario. They've done this to create division. They've done this to drive a wedge into Canada. So here's what I think we should do. We should let them drive that wedge. We should get rid of the tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, and I guess the Ontario automobile industry could just suck it up. Like, it's wild. It's absolutely wild. But there's a couple other clips that I want to play as well that are particularly important. And one of the next clip has to do with the vaccine part. And again, Danielle SMith likes to talk about, it's such a tight budget. We got no money. We have no money. And no question, fiscal responsibility, critically important. I have, for as long as I've had a microphone in front of me, been talking about the importance of fiscal responsibility. But there are ways to prioritize the things that you're going to spend on. And that gets to be important in just a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, here's Danielle SMith on COVID vaccines.
Premier, I should tell you that I voted UPC in the last several elections, but it's going to be increasingly, you're making it increasingly difficult for me to think about doing that again in the future with regard to the COVID vaccine situation. I'm a big believer in vaccinations, and I realize that we all have choices in that regard. But, your policy is going to make it very, very difficult for a lot of people to get that vaccine, even though that might be their choice. I think that's really, really unfortunate. I think if people, the vaccine is going to cost $100, and I can afford that, but a lot of people in my position, in my age group, can't afford that readily, and so they're not going to get it. Several of those people will end up in hospital, end up costing, for a regular hospital bed, I understand, about $2,000 a day, or if they end up in ICU, it'll be thousands more. I'm wondering why pharmacists can't continue to provide the vaccine. I think that was a great idea for pharmacists to give vaccinations for COVID and for other events like the flu and so forth. Now, you talked about wastage. Now, I realize that previously the packages for the vaccine were in groups of 10, but now I understand that the new dose packages are just in groups of 1. There's single doses, so there won't be the kind of wastage that there might have been in the past, or that there was in the past. And I'm thinking about
Ken. I think we're getting your point, Ken.
Yes?
We'll let the Premier address your concerns.
Well, we go by the guidance that we get from the federal government, and the guidance from the federal government is that the COVID shot is recommended for certain at-risk groups, and it's those who have pre-existing conditions, and there's lots of them, whether it's obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular issues, immunosuppression issues. So anyone over the age of 6 months old who has one of those pre-existing conditions is absolutely the priority to not only get the shot, but also get it for free. Anyone who's healthy and just wants it for peace of mind, then we'll make it available to them, but they're going to have to pay. We have to make sure that we're targeting it to those who are most at risk. And incidentally, when you look at the list of conditions, and those over age 65, that's 87% of people over aged 65 have one of those conditions that's on that list. So 87% of everyone over age 65 will be able to get it for free. The reason why we have to put it in our public health clinics is just because it's not a shelf-stable product. It has to be stored at minus 80 degrees Celsius. And so that's part of the issue that we have found with wastage. And we've looked at it in the last 3 years. 54% of the doses have been wasted.
And she's lying. she's lying because the federal body that makes the recommendations for COVID also does recommend unequivocally the COVID vaccine for anybody who can get it. It's literally in the recommendations. So the notion of, well, they don't recommend it for those folks is just false. And to suggest that anybody who's not in one of those high risk categories doesn't need it, they're just getting it for their peace of mind, is false. It's just false. She's just lying. That's what it is. But the other piece, and this is where that poll at the beginning that we talked about the number one concern of Albertans is the cost of living. This clip here seems to highlight in crystal clarity just how either out of touch Danielle SMith is or who she actually aligns with.
We have a 17-year-old son who, I guess, statistically is at a higher risk and everything else. I guess we live on the border city, so we can look at Saskatchewan rates, which are astronomically lower, and it is specific to the person driving the vehicle versus the vehicles themselves. I would like to know if, I guess, anything can be done to kind of switch up how it is, because right now we phone numerous insurance companies and you get different rates from different insurance companies. And with that, with all the immigrants who are coming in, are they placed in the same bracket, I guess, because they're brand new to the country, we have inclement weather that they're maybe not used to, or do they fall in the bracket of being over the age of 25 and their rates are reduced?
Mm-hmm. We have a private insurance market in Alberta that has caused a lot of frustration. And it was recommended to us that we, in one of the reports that we received, to look at a public insurer. And when you do that, you have to remember, then you're switching any risk of overages to taxpayers. So we had to consider that. It would cost several $1 billion for us to set up a brand new Crown corporation. And we'd go 100% no fault, which means no one would have the right to sue at all. And we just felt like that was too much change for this market.
So, don't worry, I'm going to deal with the immigrant thing in a sec. But it was recommended to the government to do a public insurer platform. It was Danielle Smith's words. It was recommended to the government that they provide public insurance. but it's too much change for the market. When one of the biggest things that Albertans are complaining about is the cost of living, and one of the biggest contributors to the cost of living is the skyrocketing price of insurance. Danielle SMith was told this is a thing that you should do. It would make people's lives better. Oh, it's too much change for the market. It is. That's pretty telling. I think that's about as mileage as we're going to get out of that graphic. And let's get to the two main events. That's right, folks. We have not just one main event. We have two. Let's talk about Invest Alberta for a second, because we've been talking about them this week. And the reason why we've been talking about them this week is because we got a tip a little while ago that Invest Alberta had a quite the weekend getaway, quite the little retreat they did, and that it might be worth FOIPing. And so we did what we do. We FOIPed it. And I would just like to say, for the record, the FOIP process with Invest Alberta, to use the word archaic would be an understatement. I feel like we could have done the FOIP request by telegram, and it would have probably been more high tech than the process in submitting a FOIP request and paying the $25 to get that FOIP request started. It literally involved me walking between two different banks because they can't take electronic monies. They at the Crown Corporation that was created to be the high tech cutting edge sales tool, they can't take an e-transfer. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about that big weekend getaway. And we've shared some of these receipts already. We have the 10 guests who, and I will admit, there are, and it probably speaks to my station in society, there are many of these things I do not know what they are. I don't know what a lion's mane is at $25. I don't know what that is. I don't know what an Arctic char is. I do know that a total bill of $1,371.52 for 10 people that is being paid for by taxpayers' money is maybe unnecessary, maybe a bit egregious, maybe a bit entitled, because let's be clear, Invest Alberta is a Crown Corporation. They are funded by the taxpayers. All of the numbers that I'm about to show you, these are your monies that these people are spending at the Fairmont Chateau, Lake Louise, from October 30th to November 1st of 2024. It's not just the dinners that were expensive, though. We have our Thursday Eggs Benny buffet breakfast for 20 that came in at $982.80 of taxpayers' dollars. We have our coffee break. This coffee break right here, $504. And I find myself again going, I don't know what that is. $504 for coffee and salted tongue. I don't know that I want to know what that is. It does scare me a little bit. I don't mind saying. What are the totals? We've been teasing it all week. Let's get it out of the way, shall we? What are the totals? How much money did Invest Alberta spend? Well, when we take a look at the costs for the food and beverage, we're looking at a grand total. This is just food and beverage for 3 days. $10,949.83. $10,949.83. But that's just the food and beverage. How much was parking? You have to pay for parking there. $2,100 for this group of, I don't know, 15, 20 people. It was $2,100 for them to park. That is more than that is quite literally, and I'm not exaggerating, that's more than most people pay in rent. That is more than people get on AISH. These people spent $2,100 of taxpayers' money in 3 days on parking. And they were able to spend more money than a single ACE recipient gets for an entire month. Let's take a look at the room costs. How much was the total room costs? How much taxpayers' money got spent on room costs? $27,937.16. What were the total Fairmont costs for the entire stay at the Fairmont, which, by the way, are not the entire costs of this event? If we take a look at what the total Fairmont costs are, we are looking at a grand total $43,658.80. That's how much Invest Alberta spent on their 3-day elite luxury weekend at the Fairmont hotels and resorts. And I'm sure there's probably, well, at least the money was going towards Fairmont Lake Louise. That's in Alberta. They were keeping the money in Alberta. Sure. I'm not convinced that's the most responsible use of taxpayer dollars, though. I'm not convinced that was it. They also had some speakers that they had come out as well. One of them flew all the way from Ireland, and the total was $7,380 to have them come out and speak. The other one came in all the way from what we can see, Edmonton, and they charged $19,500. The $19,500. The speaker's costs were $26,880. The travel expenses for all of these people to get to and from. And I got to be totally transparent here. The travel expenses are a little bit not transparent, because it appears that there was a board meeting that occurred right at the tail end of all of this thing back in Calgary. So who flew where is open to some debate, because all of the travel expenses that we got were just basically from Calgary to this elite retreat. The travel expenses were $5,727.55. So what was the grand total for 3 days of Invest Alberta at their luxury elite retreat, paid for by taxpayers? Drum roll, please. $76,266.35 for 3 days, 2.5 days, for these folks to head out to one of the nicest hotels in the province and have 3 days of living just their very best lives. It cost Alberta taxpayers, at least that we can prove, $76,266.35 over 2.5 days. But there's two kickers. Just when you thought it couldn't get ridiculous enough, there's two kickers to this story that we absolutely have to highlight. The first one is, there's a list of all of the Invest Alberta board members and employees who attended. You can go back if you want to. Doesn't matter. Their home addresses aren't on there. Don't worry. But there's one that struck us because she wasn't there. And that was former Premier of Alberta, Alison Redford. Some of you might remember back in June of 2024. So this is several months ahead of the elite, almost $80,000 retreat at the one of the classiest hotels that Alberta has to offer. Alison Redford was appointed to the board of Invest Alberta. She does not appear in any of the records that we could find whatsoever, which seems to suggest, I mean, we don't have an explanation, but I can imagine a reality where a premier who stopped being premier because of allegations of entitlement and abusing taxpayer dollars, a former premier may have said, "Oh, I don't know if I want something to do with that. That looks like it might be entitled and a waste of taxpayer dollars. So I think I might stay at home and watch Netflix or something." I can imagine That being the reason why the former premier wasn't there. But just in case you aren't offended enough by this whole debacle, we do have the second kicker for you, because included in the disclosure that we received was an invoice. And this invoice date was December 20th, 2024. And it was for another program, October 27th to October 21st, 2025. So if Invest Alberta last year spending almost $80,000 of taxpayers' money wasn't startling enough, apparently they're doing it again, because they have an advance deposit due of $41,129.55. It's also worth remembering, Invest Alberta reports directly to the Premier of Alberta, Danielle SMith. Now, for fun, we're going to do this as a two-parter, because we're going to email out all of the FOIP information that we got to every sitting MLA in the province of Alberta this week. And we're going to see which ones come back, are willing to share a comment on how they feel about an already $80,000 spent on luxury living, with another $40,000 committed. Moving on from there, we got one last little sojourn, and then we've got our big announcement, and then we're gonna wrap it up for the evening. And we had a suggestion. I'm curious what you folks think. Throw it in the chat, or send us a DM or an email. The stability of the Twitter Spaces has been not, and it hasn't lent itself to be us being able to do the open mic thing. So we're actually, somebody suggested, why don't you just do lives on TikTok? Everybody has TikTok. I don't know. Is that something you're interested in? We might do it as like a designated day, where once or twice a month, we're just going to have an open mic Alberta Politics TikTok thing. I don't know. If there's an appetite for it, we'll figure out how to do it. If there's not an appetite for it, then we'll keep banging our head against the Twitter wall. Here's the thing with this episode. I've already had to sort of address things that I'm personally involved in that have to do with Alberta politics. And so I'm going to indulge myself, and I'm going to do that again. We don't normally talk about municipal politics here in the Breakdown Land. Try to avoid it. We do have an episode coming up with a school board trustee candidate for Edmonton who reached out and asked if we'd have a conversation. We're going to try to drop that later this week after way too much delay. I feel terrible about how long it's taken to get that episode to air, because we recorded it like 2 weeks ago. But with all of the Take Back Alberta School Board stuff, somebody wanted to have a chat. We figured we should have a chat. So that's coming. But I want to take a second here and indulge myself and talk about the Calgary Party for a second, and maybe engage in a little bit of a thought experiment, because it might be maybe a little bit of fun. Let's see where it goes, shall we? So to start with, the Calgary Party is a party that is running in the next municipal election. We've got political parties now in Calgary and Edmonton. God help us all. And there was a news story that came up earlier this week, and it had some complicated accusations. On one hand, there was an allegation that was made by the mayoral candidate for the Calgary Party that the mayor of Calgary had inappropriately used marketing dollars to market things as the mayor that she then piggybacked, not directly. And to be clear, from the news reports that we've been able to see, all of these things were cleared with the appropriate ethics folks at the city of Calgary. So it might be a little bit of chicanery, nothing illegal. It might be a little morally questionable, but nothing illegal. So let's keep that in mind. I also want to be very, 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 very clear. I am not by any stretch of the imagination endorsing Jyoti Gondek as the mayoral candidate of my choice or of the Breakdown's choice. To be very, 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 very clear on that. There's also an anonymous tip that came in to CTV that alleged that Jeff Davison, who I'm also not endorsing by any stretch of the imagination, had inappropriately utilized his relationship with a cancer charity, including potentially Cancer Dollars. Now, that story had to be deleted and put back up with some major changes to it because those are alleging that a foundation that does very important work for cancer was engaging in some form of fraud, which is simply not true. So there's that. But to the point that I want to get us to, the Calgary Party is, by many accounts, the brainchild, a creature of an individual who is not new by any stretch of the imagination to the Alberta politics scene. And on my personal account, I decided that I might just point out that reality. And so I quoted the story and I said the Calgary Party, which many have identified as the product of Jyoti Gondek's former, I didn't quote the story, sorry, I rewrote their headline. The Calgary Party, which many have identified as the product of Jyoti Gondek's former chief of staff, Stephen Carter, who was allegedly terminated for bullying, says she misused funds. Fixed it for you, CTV. What a mess this election is going to be. The point that I was trying to make was that there's a lot of conflicting interests. There's a lot of history here. The Calgary Party is, by many accounts, a party that was conjured up out of the ether by none other than one Stephen Carter, who is a fairly well-known strategist, politico, all of those things. We're going to talk a bit about that. And it's also well known that he was terminated. He was given an impressive severance. I think it was over $100,000 when he was terminated. But the timing of the termination raised a lot of eyebrows. There were a lot of people who went, wait, what? Because the timing of the termination coincided with multiple reports of Mr. Carter, shockingly, bullying. And he seems to have taken significant umbrage with me pointing out that reality, because he replied to my tweet saying, do you need to be sued again? I mean, for the record, no, I don't need to, nor want to be sued again. My lawyers are plenty busy, rest assured. But I wanted to walk through that a little bit because there's some important context that we're going to talk about from 3 articles that had to do at the time. And I'm going to read so that there's no confusion into whose words I'm using. I'm going to read directly from those articles. So from this article, complaints filed against Gondek's chief of staff months before he was dismissed. To a certain degree, we're waiting for something like this to happen at some point, one source said. From the story, 2 other senior city sources who spoke on condition of anonymity said Carter could be bullying or intimidating in his interactions with city councillors. To a certain degree, we were waiting for something like this to happen, one source said of the news Carter had been dismissed. Not everybody was happy with him, that's for sure. A second source said they felt Carter was trying to import provincial-style caucus politics to City Hall in a bid to strengthen the position of the mayor. He has pushed around a lot of councillors, the source said. Intimidation tactics, that's really what he was using from day one, end quote. So that's all from the first article. So it does seem relevant. It does seem like a point of public interest, perhaps, that somebody who several years ago, let's make sure we get this right, February 3rd, 2022, was there were concerns that he was trying to import provincial-style party politics to City Hall, is now running provincial-style party politics. It does seem like perhaps there's some relevant there. Let's go to another article that might might have some relevance to this little thought experiment. At least 3 city councilors and a manager with the city of Calgary had filed complaints about Carter's behavior for violating the city's respectful workplace policy. An external firm was hired by the city to investigate the complaints. Let's go to the third article. And this is where it potentially gets even more spicy, because it involves another mayoral candidate in the current mayoral race. Sharp said she felt bullied by him and that Carter tried to intimidate her to cooperate with the mayor on council matters, or Sharp would have difficulty getting things done. She was unhappy with this conduct, so Sharp raised the matter directly with the mayor on November 5th, 2021. From the same story, Sharp later learned that there were other complaints against Carter, and the city hired an external firm to investigate the matters. In her case, Sharp said she was told that her complaint was found to be valid, but received no information about the next steps. The word came to her the same day Carter was fired by the mayor. So, all of this being said, Mr. Carter really seemed quite upset. He seemed quite bothered by the fact that I chose, for my personal account, to highlight the fact that this history existed. Now, to be very, very, very clear, there is no public record that demonstrates that Mr. Carter was fired because of the bullying. And in fact, Mr. Carter was paid severance. Now, Mr. Carter speculated in a number of articles that the reason why he was paid that severance was to avoid an embarrassing legal situation. And that's possible. It's entirely possible. But here's the question that I find myself wondering. Because if Mr. Carter's implication by threatening to sue me again, I mean, he's never sued me. I assume he's referring to the lawsuit that's been launched against me that many have characterized as a SLAPP lawsuit or a selective lawsuit against public participation. I assume that's the other lawsuit that he's referring to, which is a fascinating way to avoid or disarm the allegations that you bully people by threatening to sue them. I'm no comms expert. But it seems to be that Mr. Carter doesn't want the idea out there that he was fired because he was a bully. Okay. As a thought experiment, not necessarily in any way rooted in reality, for fun, let's say. Let's suppose that Mr. Carter was not fired for the allegations of bullying. He was not fired because a third-party investigation found that he had tried to bully then city councilor and now mayoral candidate Sonia Sharp, among others. Let's assume that that's not the case. The implication there would be that current mayor Jyoti Gondek was entirely comfortable having a chief of staff who was having multiple complaints lodged against him for bullying. Okay. If that's an assumption that we presume in this thought experiment, that has no factual basis. It does raise the question. If Jyoti Gondek was willing to overlook all of the allegations of bullying and they didn't have anything at all to do with the reason why he was fired, why did she decide to part ways with him? What could possibly be worse than bullying a sitting city councilor? There's no way to know the answer. There's no way to know what the reasons were that the mayor decided to fire Mr. Carter and pay him out the severance. There's no way to get the answers to that question. It's just a little thought experiment that is in no way seated in fact. It's an idea. It's a question. Is all that it really is. But I do think that it is important that people have the ability to have these conversations and acknowledge the history and the nuance of folks like Stephen Carter, because I think that it does potentially speak to some motives. I mean, Mr. Carter was fired by the current mayor. He's now running a provincial style party, including a mayoral candidate, who are levying allegations against the current mayor. And there doesn't seem to have been any sort of disclosure in the story or the revised story of that history. And so I struggle to understand, given the emphasis on freedom of speech these days and freedom of expression, what would be litigious in pointing out that demonstrated factual history. On an unrelated, somewhat related note, there is a fascinating article that we reviewed in the course of preparing for this episode that was done by the Sprawl, where it was an extended interview with Mr. Carter. It's a really good article, very, very well written. If you chose to Google it and read it after this, that would be entirely up to you. Is where I'll leave that there. All of that being said, let's do the announcement. Because we do have an announcement that we would like to make. And maybe after that rant, Mr. Carter will be waiting for me with some papers to serve me. Who knows? But we have an announcement that we would like to make. You may know, last month we did a little thing up in Edmonton, a little gathering with 156 of our closest Edmonton and area friends. Well, Calgary, it's your turn. October 25th. The Breakdown is going to be doing a live show in preparation for the return of the legislative session. We couldn't have timed that better if we tried it, quite frankly. We're going to be having a live show. We have some incredible guests lined up that we're going to be revealing over the next little while. The tickets will be on sale midweek. We'll do an announcement. It'll be fun. And it's going to be a blast. And it will not go as late as the one in Edmonton because we will get kicked out. So it's not an option. But some of the guests, I cannot wait to share who is going to be coming on to talk about the state of education, the state of healthcare, and what the new legislative session is going to potentially look like. So look for the announcement with the tickets going live soon. It's going to be a blast. Maybe we'll do costumes. I don't know. Also, as we wind our way through the last little bit of the show, don't forget we do have merch available now. It's at www.thebreakdownabmerch.ca. Partnered with the good folks at Oddities, which is an Alberta company that makes all of the shirts. They do all of the work, all of the back end. They just email me things every once in a while, and it's delightful. And I will say, I got a couple samples, and I am pleased with the quality of the work. I'm very happy with my new stuffs. So if you want to get yourself some Breakdown swag, there's t-shirts, there's hoodies, there's like the pullover hoodies, there's the zip up hoodies, there's hats, there's all kinds of good stuff. So you can get all that stuff there. And as always, here are the rest of the plugs. Let me see if I can find them. Here we go. 2 hours of a show, and I get a little punchy towards the end. Here we go. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, you can help us continue to produce that content by signing up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can set your own prices and all of that kind of stuff, and every little bit helps us to produce the show, get the equipment, do the things that we need to do to book these live venues and make all of that kind of stuff happen. So www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. If you are not somebody who is into the long-term commitments, the monthly commitments, then you can always send an e-transfer to, and you want to support us, you can always send an e-transfer to info@thebreakdownab.ca. And that's it. That's what we got. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who tuned in for the live show tonight. And let us know what you think about the TikTok as the platform for the open mics. I'll be honest, I have not fully rebuilt the studio after our Edmonton show, so I do not yet have the ability to make the the open mic happen. So I'm a very, very bad host. That's it for this week. Before we go, though, I absolutely have another responsibility that I have to make sure I discharge.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
The day that gets old, I don't know. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you're listening to the live, the audio version, leave the rates and the things. If you're on the YouTube, like and subscribe, share with your friends, all of that good stuff. We will be dropping that episode with the school board trustee later this week. We'll be launching the live tickets later this week. And in the meantime and in between time, as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.
Thank you.